Now it's ready. Okay. Is it good now? No. All right. Well, if we look at all the facets of history, we can trace the origination of the Armenian Evangelical movement back to the European Renaissance. In the 18th century, Armenians who lived under Ottoman rule sent their sons to European universities to get their education there. The Armenians always put a high premium on education. And scores of, hundreds I would say, of young Armenians went to Europe and started studying at various universities. And those who studied at French and German and Italian universities were imbued with the spirit of the Renaissance. They were taught about the dignity of the human being and that they should not be subservient to the Turks. And they were encouraged to think independently, to research every subject, to question everything, not accept things at face value, but try to question and understand the reason behind everything. And so these young people, after being educated in Europe, returned to their homeland, Western Armenia. 3 of them were hired by the Armenian Patriarchate of Constantinople as teachers at the seminary. One of them was Professor Grigor Peshti-Maljan. The other one was Professor Apisohom Yutudjan. And the third one was Dr. Hovannes Dersaagyan. These were hired by the Armenian Patriarchate to teach seminary students, students who were preparing for the priesthood. These professors, they found that when they were in Europe, the Germans, the French, the Italians could read the New Testament in a language which they could understand. Whereas in Western Armenia, the Armenians who went to church had to listen to the Gospels being read in Kurapar, which they did not understand. They spoke Ashkarapar, didn't know Kurapar. And there was no Ashkarapar New Testament. So these 3 professors, with their students, embarked on the task of translating the New Testament. They started with the 4 Gospels and then went to the epistles. They translated the whole New Testament from Kurapar, classical Armenian, into Ashkarapar, which was the modern Armenian. And they approached the Patriarch and they asked that he fund the project, that he approved the project and fund it. Their aim was to publish the entire New Testament in Ashkarapar, in the language which the Armenians spoke and knew, and then distribute these Bibles, these New Testaments, among the Armenian population so that they could get better acquainted with the teachings of Jesus and his apostles. And they thought that knowing the Bible, knowing the contents of the New Testament would make them not only better Christians, but also help them endure the suffering to which they were subjected by the Ottoman rulers. To their amazement, the Patriarch said no. He was actually, the Patriarch was in favor. The Patriarch was Stepan Avni. He was the Patriarch of the time. They approached him and they told him about their project, and he told them he was in favor of their project, but he did not exercise his authority because the Amiras were opposed. The Amiras were wealthy Armenians who lived in Constantinople. They had amassed their wealth either by being successful as merchants or because they had high positions in the Ottoman government. So these wealthy Armenians were called Amiras, Amira, and they lived in Constantinople. They were very influential because of their wealth. They controlled the church. So the Patriarch and the church were controlled by the Amiras. The Patriarch was sympathetic with the reformers and was approved their project, but he did not exercise his authority because the Amiras were opposed, and they were the ones who controlled the church. So he did nothing about it. He was succeeded by Archbishop Hagopos Seropian, and he also straddled the fence. He told the reformers that he sympathized with them and he thought their project was worthwhile, but then he told them that since the Amiras opposed it, it couldn't be implemented. So they told him, forget about it. It's amazing that his brother, the brother of Archbishop Hagopos Seropian, was Stepan Seropian, and he was a member of the Society of the Pious. These three professors, together with their students and three priests, formed a society called the Society of the Pious. They met at regular intervals and studied the New Testament. Each day they would study a chapter from the Gospels and then a chapter from the epistles written by the apostles, and they would try to find out what Jesus and the apostles said to the people who lived in those days. So they had a Bible study, kind of a Bible study group. These reformers presented two projects to the patriarchs of their day. One was that the New Testament be translated into Ashtarapar and distributed to the Armenians. Number two, that Sunday schools be established, that every Armenian church should have a Sunday school next to it where the Bible, where the New Testament, the Gospels and the epistles are taught to the members of the congregation. These were their two demands.
What was the threat? What was wrong with teaching the people the new Bible?
There was...
So what were the rich people afraid of?
There was no threat, but it looks like the Amiras thought that if the reformers had their way, they might wrest control of the church from their hands. So in 1844, Matthios Georgian became Patriarch of Constantinople, and he had to deal with the reformers. The Society of the Pious, as I said, consisted of these three professors who were teachers at the seminary, and there were three priests, Der Vartanes Yeznagyan, Der Haruchun Bardasaryan, and Der Kevor Kevorkyan. These priests were also members of the Society of the Pious, and they were in favor of having the Gospels and the epistles translated into Ashtarapar, and that Sunday schools be established at every Armenian church, because they found that most people were ignorant of the New Testament. They didn't know what the New Testament taught. So they wanted to increase the biblical knowledge of the people, which was a good thing. Now, Matthios Chuadjian, who was elected Patriarch in 1844, didn't like the Society of the Pious, didn't like the Armenian reformers, and it was his aim to crush them. First, he resorted to soft tactics. He visited the seminary and told these professors that he would increase their salaries if they forgot about the reform movement. They told them to put an end to the Society of the Pious, put an end to the Bible studies, forget about their projects, and he said if they did, he would raise their salaries. And they told him they were not interested in money. Their concern was for the spiritual welfare of their compatriots. And they wanted to make sure that their fellow Armenians knew what Jesus taught, what was required of them as Christians. And they wanted every Armenian to die a saved man and inherit the kingdom of God, have eternal life at the end. So when he found that he couldn't bribe them, he thought of organizing public debates. He was kind of sure that during these public debates, the reformers would find out that they didn't have grassroots support from the local communities and that they would be persuaded to forget about their projects, their reforms. So there were public debates, and these public debates were quite interesting. Representing the patriarch was Hovannes Deroyan Chamurjan. He was also a teacher at the seminary. And representing the reformers was Professor Apisohom Yutujan. And they would debate. These debates were announced ahead of time, and the subject was chosen by the patriarch. Like the subject of the first debate was who had the highest authority. The patriarch's representative, Hovannes Chamurjan, argued that the patriarch had the highest authority. And the reformers, represented by Yutujan, argued that Jesus Christ is the head of the church and he has the highest authority. That the highest authority in the church is Jesus, and next to Jesus, the highest authority is the Avedaram, the gospel. So, after 7 debates, the patriarch discovered that the reformers were not losing ground. In fact, they were gaining more sympathy and more supporters. So he put an end to the debates. And on July 1, 1846, July 21, 1846, he published an encyclical denouncing the reformers as heretics. And he removed all those parish priests who were members of the Society of the Pious or were sympathetic to the cause of the reformers. So he pronounced an anathema over them. He declared them heretics and told all Armenians not to associate with them. And then he excommunicated them. He disfellowshipped them from the church. He threw them out. He said, "You're no longer members of the Armenian Apostolic Church." This happened on June 21, 1846. Now, in the Ottoman Empire, non-Muslim communities were called millet. And according to the Ottoman system, every millet was represented by its religious head. The Patriarch Matyos Choadjan told the reformers that he would no longer represent them. And so they had no representation at the Ottoman government. If they needed a marriage certificate or a birth certificate or a business permit, they had to go to the Patriarch, and the Patriarch refused to serve them. So they were left in a great predicament. So they decided to ask the Ottoman government to recognize them as a millet, separate millet. And in November 27, 1850, Sultan Abdul Majid recognized the Armenian Evangelicals as a separate millet, and he called them Protestant Melleti. So the name Protestant came from there. The Turkish Sultan the Armenian Evangelicals Protestants. But they did not call themselves Protestants. When they were excommunicated from the Armenian Apostolic Church, these people, the members of the Society of the Pious, which numbered about 500 people, on July 1, 1846, they made a public declaration. They said, our aim was not to start a new church. Our aim was to reform the Armenian Apostolic Church, which we consider to be as our mother church. We were born in the Armenian Apostolic Church. The Armenian Apostolic Church is our mother church. We love the Armenian Apostolic Church, and our aim is just to reform the church, not to destroy it, and not to start a separate church. We did not leave the church left us. And so they declared themselves Hayastanyarts Avedaranagan Yegerezi, which means the Armenian Evangelical, or the Evangelical Church of Armenia. And they said, we're not Presbyterian, we're not Lutheran, we're not Methodist, we are Armenian Evangelicals. When they applied to the Sultan to be recognized as a separate millet, the Sultan said, who are you? And Stepan Seropian, who was the brother of Archbishop Seropian, who later became Patriarch, he said, by nationality we're Armenians, by religion we're Christian, by confession we are Evangelical. And Stepan Seropian was chosen to be the first Askabet, the first community leader for the Armenian Evangelicals. And it's really interesting that the first Askabet of the Armenian Evangelicals was the brother of a former Patriarch of Constantinople. Two brothers on different sides of the fence. Now, since the hierarchy of the Armenian Apostolic Church shunned the evangelicals, excommunicate them, threw them out of the church, they felt that they were left like orphans. However, at that time, American Protestant missionaries started working in Turkey. And these Protestant missionaries, they found that the Armenian Evangelicals were very close to them in their thinking. As I said, the Armenian Evangelicals presented two reforms originally. One was the translation of the New Testament into Ashkarapar, and then the establishment of Sunday schools. And the missionaries, of course, they were interested in having the Bible distributed among the people, local people. So the missionaries told these people, look, the Armenian Patriarchate refused to fund the printing of the Armenian Bible in the vernacular, we will fund it. So the Armenian missionaries supplied the funds for the publication of the Armenian Bible in Ashkarapar. And little by little, closer ties were forged. The missionaries started establishing colleges. And the Armenian Evangelicals encouraged education. One of the things that I have to say, to the credit of the Armenian Evangelicals, they realized the importance of educating Armenian women and girls. So the Armenian Evangelicals established colleges for girls. One of them was in Marash, the Armenian Evangelical College for Girls. Before that, you know, the Armenians who lived in the provinces and in Cilicia, they did not educate their girls. They educated their sons, but they did not educate their girls. The Armenian Evangelicals said, we have to educate our women and our girls because we want the other half of our nation to be as productive as the male part. So the Armenian Evangelicals promoted this, and they received a lot of flack for it. Many people started criticizing the Armenian Evangelicals, saying that by educating the women, the rate of divorce would go up. By educating women, immorality might spread. But none of that was true, of course. Today, of course, everybody agrees that was the right thing to do. Educating young girls and women was the right thing to do. But there was, at that time, you know, there was a group of people who criticized whatever the Armenian Evangelicals did was criticized. So the first church, the first Armenian Evangelical Church was established in Istanbul at Pera on July 1, 1846, and in 1850 there was another church established at Gedik Pasha. Both of these churches still exist, and I've been told that at the Gedik Pasha church every Sunday there's a service in Turkish, and then there's a service in Armenian. And I've been told that most of the Armenians who attend are migrant workers from Armenia. So Armenians in search of jobs are leaving Armenia and traveling to Turkey, working in Istanbul, finding jobs in Istanbul, jobs that they couldn't find in their homeland. And then on Sundays they go to the Armenian Evangelical Church at Gedik Pasha. Well, it's good to know that these two churches still exist and they continue their mission. And there are now Christian Turks. There are Christian Turks. We had here Reverend Krikor Balolu a year ago. He's the Armenian Evangelical pastor in Istanbul. And he told us that there are now more than a dozen Turkish Christian congregations, and there are 3 in Ankara. He said 10 years ago there were none, or there was one or two. Now there are more Turks who are turning to Christianity and are being Christianized, and there are now Turkish congregations that are springing up in Ankara and Istanbul. That's good to hear. Well, in eastern Armenia, in 1820, a similar thing happened. There was a Persian Armenian by the name of Haruchun Kalustyan. He was fighting with the Russian army against the Persians during the Persian-Russian War in 1805, and he fell into the hands of the Persians. And the Persian general introduced him to the Shah. He said, look, we got this prisoner of war, he's Armenian. He was fighting with the Russians, but he's an Armenian, and he is a clever man. He's the most clever man, the general said, I have ever met. And the Shah was impressed by this young man, so he adopted him. And he was educated at the Persian court. He learned Persian, Turkish, Arabic, and was taught the Islamic religion. His name was changed to Mirza Farrokh, which is a Persian name. Haruchun Kalustyan became Mirza Farrokh. But in 1826, this guy fled Persia, went to Armenia, searching for his family. In Armenia, he met Ghazar Bartabet, who told him that he and 3 of his students, Zohrab, Sarkisyan, Mardiros, Dararian, and Sarkis Hambartsumian, had translated the Bible from Kurapar into Eastern Armenian. But they needed funds to publish this, and they had no money. And this fellow, Persian Armenian, Haruchun Kalustyan, who used to be called Mirza Farrokh, told them that he he had lots of golden coins, which he had brought with him from Persian court. So he had enough money to publish the Bible in Eastern Armenian. And so the Bible was translated into Eastern Armenian, and then Bible study groups sprang up everywhere. There were Armenian Evangelical groups at Shamah, Alexandropol, Arakala, Gars, and Tiflis, because of the work of Ghazar Bartabed and his seminary students, and thanks to this Persian Armenian, this Armenian who came from Persia loaded with gold coins. It's amazing that this happened at the same time the reform movement was going on in Western Armenia. But in 1858, Matyos Tuarjan was elected Catholicos of all Armenians, and he excommunicated the Armenian Evangelicals who lived in Eastern Armenia and in Tiflis, Georgia. Now, when we look at those events, we find that Matyos Tuarjan was short-sighted. He was really short-sighted. What he did was wrong. He should have embraced the reformers, and the Armenian church would have been stronger and richer today. When I look at the Armenian church today, I find, well, they embraced the projects that these early reformers came up with. The Armenian Bible is now in Ashkarapar and is distributed everywhere. Armenian Apostolic churches have established Sunday schools. Their Sunday schools, every single Armenian church, whether Apostolic or Catholic, has a Sunday school today. They operate Sunday schools today. So what they refused to do in 1844, today is an accomplished fact, and we praise God for that. The contributions of the Armenian Evangelicals to the Armenian nation are quite outstanding. The Armenian Evangelicals constitute less than 1% of all Armenians. We're just less than 1% of all Armenians. But what we lack in numbers, we've compensated by our zeal and hard work. In 1846, there were only two Armenian Evangelical churches in Istanbul. But within 10 years, there were churches in Urfa, in Kilis, in Alabazar, in Marzovan, in Marash, Aintab, and Erzurum, and Adana, and Van. So before the genocide, there were 5,000 Armenian evangelical congregations and 50,000 members, or the members of the churches and those enrolled in Sunday schools was 50,000. But of course the genocide decimated us. Only 15,000 survived. Of the 50,000 Armenian evangelicals, only 15,000 survived the genocide. And but our contributions said was promoting education, promoting higher education, and emphasizing that Armenian clergymen must be highly educated. In those days, in the Ottoman Empire, everyone who could sing well was ordained a priest. If he was a plumber or a carpenter or a butcher, it made no difference. If he had a good song, they taught him the liturgy, and then he was ordained a priest. The Armenian Evangelicals said, no, nobody could enter the priesthood, or nobody could become a clergyman unless he got a college degree, at least a college degree. So they promoted the idea of higher education for all, and also for the clergy. We had colleges in Marash, Aintab, and Karpet, and Marzovan. Today, of course, those are destroyed. But in 1881, the Armenian Evangelicals established the first Armenian church in the North American continent. The first Armenian church in the North American continent was built in 1881 and it still exists today. It's called the Armenian Congregational Church of the Martyrs in Worcester, Massachusetts. And of course, we are proud to say that the Armenian Evangelicals founded and still operate the only university outside our motherland. Haigazian University has been in existence for 50 years now, and we offer scholarships to all Armenians, regardless of their creed. Every Armenian who wants to be educated at Haigazian and has a financial problem receives either a partial or a full scholarship, regardless of his church affiliation. The only requirement is that he be an Armenian. So we have never discriminated among Armenians. We've never differentiated between an Apostolic Armenian and a Catholic Armenian or an Evangelical Armenian. We look at all Armenians as our brothers and sisters. And last year, the Armenian Missionary Association of North America gave $800,000 to Haigazian for scholarships, to award scholarships to Armenian students. So we believe in education, and we believe that if we educate more Armenians, our nation would be stronger and richer. The Armenian Evangelicals helped inculcate moral principles among their adherents and students, and we also promoted the Christian lifestyle. You know, as Armenian Evangelicals said, it's not enough to be baptized as an Armenian Christian, but you have to live as a Christian. You have to study the Bible, you have to read the Gospels, you have to pray every day, read the Gospel at home every day, pray every day, have a Christian lifestyle. And the Armenian Evangelicals abolished the division between the lay people and the clergy. You know, the Armenians call the lay people Ashkharagan. Ashkharagan means people of the word, or worldly people. And the clergy are called Hokhtavaragan, the spiritual people. The Armenian Evangelicals said, no. Every Christian is supposed to be spiritual, not just the clergy. Every Christian is supposed to be spiritual, not worldly. And they said every Christian should have a new heart and a new life. Every Christian should experience the miracle of the second birth, moral regeneration, through the grace of Jesus Christ. The Armenian Evangelical Church always stood for the liberty of conscience. Vartanans fought for the liberty of conscience. Vartan Mamigonian, on the eve of the Battle of Avarar, said we're fighting for the freedom of conscience. And the Armenian Evangelicals always stood for the liberty, freedom of conscience, and freedom of thought. And they made the church democratic. The Armenian Evangelical Church is a democratic church. Every church member has a voice in how the church is to be run and how the money of the church is to be spent. In other words, the leadership is collective. It's not, the leadership of the church is not entrusted to one man, to one person. The leadership is collective. In other words, the church council, every congregation has a church council, and the church council decides how to run the church, whom to hire as a minister, whom to fire, how to spend the money, where to send church funds to, and the members of the church council are elected directly by the congregation every year. So the Armenian Evangelical Church is a democratic organization. And then we're open to new ideas, open to innovations. We're not rigid, we're very flexible. Of course, there are some differences between the Armenian Evangelicals and the Armenian Apostolics and the Catholics, but these differences are not irreconcilable. We have common ground. For example, we all accept the Nicene Creed, Havadoham Kanak. The Nicene Creed is recited every Sunday every Armenian church. Հավատամ կիմի Աստված է հայրն ամենագալ արարիչների եւ իմ դեր Հիսուս Քրիստոս որդին Աստծո ծնյալ Աստծո օրենյացին եւ Սուրբ Հոգին. And the Nicene Creed in its entirety has always been accepted by the Armenian Evangelicals. So we accept the Nicene Creed, and the Armenian Apostolics accept the Nicene Creed, and the Armenian Catholics accept the Nicene Creed. So we have a common denominator. And the Nicene Creed states the major beliefs. So when it comes to the core beliefs of Christianity, we are all in agreement. But I said the emphasis, the Armenian Evangelicals say it's not enough to be baptized as a Christian and then not live as a Christian. So we promote the Christian lifestyle and we say every Christian must study the gospel, must read the gospel for himself. And that's why the Armenian Evangelicals, from their inception, wanted to make the Bible, the New Testament, available to the Armenians in a language which they could read and understand. So we encourage every person to study the gospel and live in harmony with the teachings of Jesus Christ, so that they'll have eternal life with the Lord after their earthly pilgrimage is finished. Now, let me give you examples how differences can be bridged, or how other people have bridged differences. Look at the Jews. In America, there are three kinds of Jews. There's the Orthodox Jews. The Orthodox Jews maintain all their old traditions and all the old laws without accepting any change. And so you see them wearing beards, black coats, wide-rimmed black hats. These are Orthodox Jews. Then there are the conservative Jews. The conservative Jews have accepted more modern ideas. Like they wear like you and me. They don't even wear the skull cap, the Jewish skull cap. And then there's the Reformed Jews. The Reformed Jews are very interesting. Once when my wife worked for TWA, I flew regularly to Tel Aviv because I have relatives there. On a flight to Tel Aviv, it so happened that the person seated next to me was an American rabbi, and he belonged to the Reformed Jewish tradition, Reformed Jew. And then I saw that he was eating pork. And I said, as far as I know, your prophet Moses has prohibited you from eating pork. And he laughed. He said, yeah. He said, but I'm Reformed Jew. And he said, we believe that if pork is well cooked, it's harmless. The reason Moses told the Jews not to eat pork because they didn't have pressure cookers at that time. And pork, when it's not well cooked, it's harmful. But since we have pressure cookers now and it's well cooked, I can eat it. See? An Orthodox Jew wouldn't touch it. But you see, there are different strands, but they're all Jews. It's called Judaism. And let me give you another example from the Christian world. There's the Church of England. In Europe and the Middle East, is known as the Anglican Church, or the Church of England. In the United States, it's called the Episcopalian Church. And the Episcopalian Church, by the way, is in communion with the Armenian Apostolic Church. In other words, the Armenian Apostolic Church accepts weddings, baptisms performed by the Church of England. They're in communion. The Armenian Apostolics are not in communion with the Greek Orthodox, but they are in communion with the Church of England, Episcopalian Church. Well, look at the Episcopalian Church. There are three types of Episcopalians. They have the High Church. The High Church is very much Catholic. If you go to the Episcopalian High Church, you think you are in a Catholic church. There are very slight differences between the Episcopalian High Church and the Catholics. Then they have the Middle Church. The Middle Church is half Protestant, half Catholic. And then they have the Low Church, and the Low Church is Protestant. But it's one communion. It's called Episcopalian Church. Episcopalian Church, and they have all these kinds. Why can't we have one Armenian Church with three strands, the Armenian Apostolics, the Armenian Catholics, and the Armenian Evangelicals? Like in the Episcopalian Church, they have the High Church, Middle Church, Low Church. Why can't we all recognize each other as Christian? The Evangelicals have always accepted the Apostolics and the Catholics as Christian. But sometimes some Apostolics have labeled us as heretics, like Patriarch Tuhajian called us heretics. Whatever. Let's stop labeling each other. Why can't we merge into one church, become one church with three different strands? And that, I believe, would strengthen the Armenian church and Armenian communities and bring added richness. There are Armenians who are interested in liturgy and traditions. And so the Armenian Apostolic Church, Catholic churches appeal to them. And there are Armenians who are interested in digging deep within the covers of the New Testament. They want to study what Jesus has taught and said and what the apostles have taught and said. They don't want to have a superficial knowledge of the New Testament. They want to dig deep within its covers to find out exactly what Jesus teaches. And these people would be attracted to the Evangelical Church. So, we don't steal people from other churches, by the way. We believe that Jesus has commissioned us to preach the gospel to all nations, to all peoples. Prior to his ascension, Jesus said to his disciples, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all people, to all nations." And so we take that commission seriously, and we just proclaim the gospel message. But we don't force people to accept it. It's up to them whether they want to embrace the gospel of Jesus Christ or if they want to reject it. It's up to them. And I believe that the time has come for closer cooperation between all segments of Armenians. I'm pleased to say that the rift caused in 1844 has been healing. There are now, in 1846, there were no contacts between the Evangelicals and the Apostolics. Now there are more contacts. There are cordial relations being established. Although there are some who are trying to disrupt the cordial relations that are developing. I believe that's harmful. And our Adenabet said that Teryan says, "Our strength lies in our unity. Whatever fractures us weakens us. Whatever unites us strengthens us."
Yes.
Okay, weren't there some other differences that caused the separation?
Well,
Like the baptism and the celibacy of the...
those came later. Those came later. Those came after the reformers were excommunicated and expelled from the church. So that drove the reformers closer to the Protestant missionaries, and they became more influenced by the Protestants. And then as time went on, there were other things there were other differences added, like baptism is a requirement. And the Armenian Evangelicals, there are some, you see, by the way, when we say Armenian Evangelicals, we're different from the American Evangelicals. We're not the same. By evangelical, we use the word evangelical because it's a translation of Avedaranagan. The pioneers of our movement called themselves Aistaniyites Avedaranagan Yetsi. And so how do you translate Avedaranagan? Evangelical. But by evangelical, we mean that we are gospel-oriented. We are gospel-oriented. We recognize the gospel as the center of our Christian life and religious practice. But we are not like the American Evangelicals. We have many differences with the American Evangelicals, doctrinal differences with the American Evangelicals. Armenian Evangelicals have accepted the baptism of the Armenian Apostolic Church, baptism of Armenian Catholics. So if a person was baptized in the Armenian Apostolic Church, we don't rebaptize them. We recognize the apostolic baptism, the Catholic baptism, and we baptize infants as well as adults. There are some evangelicals who baptize only adults. You have first to believe in Jesus Christ and the gospel and then be baptized. We baptize infants if their parents are Christian. If their parents are Christian and if they pledge to teach the gospel to their child as he grows up, then we baptize infants. Yes?
I enjoyed this lecture very much, and I learned quite a bit. After 1844, when the new Catholicos came in Etchmiadzin as leadership, did any of them came to change their mind and call back the word of the first one in 1844 was called the Society of the Pious Members heretic? Did anybody try to change it afterwards? Has there been one Catholicos who was sympathetic?
It's true that there was a Catholicos at Etchmiadzin, but he had no authority in Constantinople. The Constantinople church was run by the Amiras, not even by the Patriarch. The Patriarch was the slave or the stooge of the Amiras, High Amiraner. They were the ones who were in control of the church. They did what they pleased, and the Catholicos had no authority over them. The Catholicos in Etchmiadzin could not order them to do anything at that time. But then, as I said, the tragedy is that in 1858, the Patriarch of Constantinople, who excommunicated the reformers, was elected Catholicos of all Armenians, and he excommunicated the Armenian Evangelicals who lived in eastern Armenia.
I understand that Armenian is quite friendly with the Armenian Evangelical Church.
Yes, the reason is simple. Aram Catholicos studied at Nest, near School of Theology. After being ordained as a priest, as a young priest, he was sent to the nearest School of Theology in Beirut to study theology there. And there he met Armenian evangelical ministers, or students who were studying to become Armenian evangelical ministers, and he developed close friendships with some of them. And he said, in his recent speech, he said that when he came in touch, when he forged close friendships with Armenian evangelical ministers at Nest, in the School of Theology, he discovered that they had a great devotion for Jesus Christ and a great love for the Armenian nation. And so he started respecting them. He said, I developed a healthy respect for the Armenian evangelicals because I found that they are devoted to Jesus Christ and they have a great love for their Armenian nation. So people who know us, like Vasken I, the God of all Armenians, had very cordial relationships with us. He always invited us to Etchmiadzin and said, Askat Serdunde. And Karikin II, also, very cordial relations. But unfortunately, the present Karikin II doesn't want to talk to us. We don't know why. Yes.
During the Society of the Pious, did the Armenian Church take advantage of the fact that its community wasn't able to read the Bible for themselves and twist things around, like the Catholic Church, for example, the plots in heaven, so on and so forth?
Well, as I said, there were public debates. And during the first public debate was about the authority, who has the highest authority, and the representative of the Patriarch Teryan said the Patriarch has the highest authority. And the evangelical Teryan, Professor Teryan, said Jesus Christ is the highest authority, and next to Jesus is the Avedaran. And these are the two highest authorities. And then the Patriarch called the Society of the Pious the Society of the Impious, because he disagreed with them on theological grounds. Yes, there were recriminations, like the Patriarch George did some nasty things. Like he told Armenian landlords who were apostolics and who had evangelical renters to expel the renters, put them out on the street. Don't rent your house to an evangelical Armenian. I mean, he made Armenians hate one another. He did some nasty things. Well, the Lord will judge him.
Is there a difference between evangelical and apostolical church in a point like evangelical, they translate or explain verses of the Bible differently than apostolical church? Is there such a thing?
Not exactly. I would say when it comes to Bible interpretation, there are some verses that may look ambiguous in English or in Armenian, but if you go to the Greek original, there's no ambiguity there when you go to the Greek origin. So I believe if we decide to follow the gospel only, the gospel of Jesus Christ, there'll be unity and agreement on every subject. But the disagreements arise because the Apostolic Church has always said, we accept the gospel plus the traditions and the teachings of the church fathers. And some of the church fathers have written things that are not in harmony with the gospel. So that's where the differences emerge.
Level?
Yes. Do I assume correctly that when it comes to prelacy church and evangelical membership, they could go to the prelacy church and do the baptisms or the marriages? There's no actually, there's a good relationship between prelacy and evangelical church. Is that what it is?
There are good friendly relations, there's cooperation, but I don't believe there is mutual recognition yet.
I see.
We recognize them. But
What does it take to do this, to resolve all these animosities or differences or whatever they are? What does it take to do that in your opinion?
I believe that as more people become enlightened and more people come to know us better or more closely, the rift that separates us will disappear. I believe it's a matter of time before we all come together and worship together.
But I don't see any substance in the rift. There was some person who had some kind of hidden agenda, looks like. In my opinion, made a mistake. Why wouldn't somebody get up and explain it and then resolve?
We always said, Armenian evangelical leaders have always said to the Cathologos in Echmiadzin and to Cathologos in Antlias to issue a decree removing the anathema that Matthios Georgian pronounced over the evangelicals. And they haven't agreed to do that. I don't know why. They haven't stated the reason. They said, well, let's not discuss it. That has been their attitude. They haven't given a reason why. So do you still consider us heretics? They said, no, we don't consider you to be heretics. Okay. But they're not lifting the anathema.
First Sam and then Abu.
Yes.
Would you say that since you said, Cathologos said, this is your home, come over here, join us, and would you say that the roots of our evangelical church is the apostolic church? Like here, we were separated, but our base is the Armenian Apostolic Church.
Yeah, we Armenian Evangelicals to this day say we consider the Armenian Apostolic Church to be our mother church. But sometimes the mother church has not accepted us as their Harazat Vortinej.
If Armenian Evangelical Church was established in 1844 as Armenian High Abedaranagan, right? Why place is called Hypokagannet.
I said the name Polokagan was not the name that we gave, that we chose to describe ourselves. The name, first of all, it was given by the Turkish Sultan. He called us Protestant. And then the Armenian Apostolics and the Catholics started calling us Protestants, Polokagan, in derision. Like in Iran, they call us Porot, which means leper. I would say Porot nereye gelecekten atıyor. If you go to the Church of the Lepers.
In Europe, they use the word Protestant.
Evangelicals never use it.
In this regard, Catholicos Terian, he made it clear to all the clergy in Lebanon, in Syria, Iran, there some time ago, in around 1949-50, that there are no Armenian Protestants.
That's true.
They are evangelicals.
That's true.
They never protested against our church.
Yes.
Because of ideology, they were separated.
Yes, Catholicos Terian made that statement. He made that statement, and we always quote him. And it's too bad he's not around today.